Fang the Hunter, Issue 4. Fang and Bean have time to talk surrounded by robots, but it makes sense here because Heavy King hasn't given the order for them to attack them yet. I assume from him telling them to return the gem. I still don't know why he didn't give the order earlier, because he had no reason to think that talking to them and waiting would cause them to return the gem on their own. It attempts comedy again by having him refer to running away as a foolproof plan. Also, you could have assumed that they were surrounded, but I assume this makes sense because there was one area where there wasn't a robot. What really doesn't make sense is him not telling Bean to throw bombs at them. Fang whistles, but the vehicle's gonna take a long time to get back to him. And Bean's meant to mock it unfairly when he was just told it's a big ship. What a jerk. So eventually Bark grabs the chain and makes the robot get humiliated. It took way too long for this to happen. That should be happening for most of the scene, not just boring dialogue. Instead, the comic space on anything I'm not discussing here is wasted. I can't understand why Bean's not throwing bombs the whole time. We all know he can generate bombs out of nowhere. There's no excuse for making him a coward. You dealt with these things in Sonic Mania easily. It's not like they've fought these guys before, so they don't know that they're not a threat. Eventually, Fang gets frozen. Sonic congratulates Tails and gets thanked. A panel is wasted before he complains about the lack of robots to fight. The page didn't need that many boring panels. The Ice Cube Fangs in gets sent into the wall, so Fang gets hurt with the impact shown. His vehicle hits the robot. It'd take longer if I said the names of these robots. Fang uses the sword to freeze the green robot with his own sword. That's cool. I hope when he inevitably stops using the sword because of stupid meta logic, we'll know why. Because he has no excuse to stop using such an overpowered instant I win weapon. Other than, he'll miss. Which is the excuse for why he used his gun so much. It could be explained that it got broken. Him just not picking it up again would be sloppy writing. Eventually he plans to put the gem in his vehicle after picking it up off screen. One of the robots talks in a stupid way, which makes no sense for a robot who should only have free will in the sense that he could think up attack strategies. There's no reason Eggman would program him to talk like that. If Bean can remember to summon a bomb, and he can still summon as big bombs as he wants, why was he ever not summoning bombs? He never hesitates to summon bombs because he could be hurt by it. Why don't we see the impact when the explosion hits his enemy? What kind of fight scene drawing is this? Where's the satisfaction? We're not supposed to like and feel sorry for the robots, so why the censorship? It's not like every time you attack a robot in the games, the impact gets censored. Why does it make a fool out of a character with a menacing name who's had menacing moments by having to get scared because his vehicle warped? Imagine if Shadow looked scared after warping. Why does he even try implying he won't save Bark? Bean threatened to ditch him before. It's like he wants to write every character as an idiot because it makes drama and comedy easier, and only writes a character as smart when it's plot convenient, or Sega forces him to write the plot around it. Earlier he said nobody takes anything from me. And now he doesn't want Bark back, when Bark did nothing since he reunited with him to justify him not wanting him back anymore. It's just a continuity error. It only makes him look bad to lie about not wanting him back, because he's a tsundere. Eventually the robot smacks Bark to the floor, but for no reason we can't see when he impacted him. Only see him impact the floor. Eventually Fang's vehicle saves the day, with a flash of light to apparently censor the vehicle crashing into the robot. Except in a panel later, he's standing anyways. Wasn't it obvious you should make him get sent flying by the vehicle? Instead, I don't know what's going on. It's convenient that Bean even can care about Bark when he's happy to be a criminal. Why is he a bad guy then? He has no logical reason to care about Bark. He never talks to him or shows affection for him. The fact that Fang talks so much makes me wonder why Heavy King doesn't attack him to stop him from warping away. It's a good thing Fang and his friends didn't need to be rescued by Sonic in their personal miniseries. Sonic acts melodramatic about how bored he is. Doesn't this break the Sega rule don't get Sonic overly emotional? Its point is for exaggerating him for comedy, but exaggerating it isn't in character. Tails says if he set the reactor to overload, they'd only have a few minutes to escape it before it blows up the whole warship. How does he plan to do that when there's no buttons on it to press though? He doesn't have any gadgets to do that, just have him have a ray gun. Sonic sweetly compliments him. It would have been better if he weren't only complimenting him for serving his own self-interest. Why did the explosion happen off screen? Even in Sonic 2, we saw the Death Egg explode from the inside. Then all Sonic and Tails do is escape. I was looking forward to them beating up Heavy King. He's a robot, of course they'd be allowed to do that. He could have been in the same room as them. Tails was smart to make the reactor's sorry destruction sequence right away, of course. Maybe if they actually had to fight the robots, they wouldn't have survived to be yelled at by Eggman, who says he won't recover them. It only makes sense in that he's saying this to spite them. It'd be smart of him to recover the materials of the warship and robots to reuse them for free, after blowing the robots up. The vehicle's teleportation somehow causes motion sickness in Bean and Bark, but not Fang. There's no way one time would be enough to get used to it. And Fang can only have a few moments to celebrate before Bean goes out of character and yells at him for all he was put through. When I expect him to be a thrill seeker, he was grateful the whole time for the adventure. Because he smiled when he was blown up. Did he look like he was a scaredy cat in any of his fights in Sonic the Fighters? No, he can summon bombs. Why would he have been scared? He and Bark ditch him in the flying sidecars that never existed in the games. I'm just wondering if the writer will have the guts to have the stick for a long period of time, if he even does let it stick considering how in love he is with the idea of Team Hooligan that he used for a needlessly long time. Why did it take him this long to make Fang solo again when that's how he always was in the games? Well, I'm all for not having an adaptation be like the games. Let's just have it be creative, and you wouldn't make it through 90% of the Sonic series otherwise. But Team Hooligan ripped off Archie, so it wasn't creative. Also, the name of their team was too stupid to take seriously, so I never wanted to use it. Bean calls Bark Buddy again. I didn't feel like Bark ever appreciated that though, he's too stoic. Fang's smart enough to see the appeal in this because this means he doesn't have to split up his bounties. So it only makes sense that he got mad because they were stealing sidecars. He has a boring Skype call with Eggman. He should know better than to smile while saying he was chasing a fairy tale because of course it makes Eggman know he's lying. If he doesn't believe him, why is he dropping it? Well, it is smart of him to hire him again. So, he isn't pressing the issue so that I can hire him for investigating a new island. I have to assume he means a new island and that he wants to conquer another island to get new territory. Because it'd be rare for there to literally be new islands. Eggman says he'll pay him again. The story ends with Fang getting a happy ending and expecting me to be glad he's calling himself the Hunter when he doesn't literally go hunting. Flynn mocked fans that didn't like that he stopped using Starline by saying that they want him to ride off into the sunset. So why is he happy with giving Fang a happy ending? It's even the sunset, so he might as well be riding off into the sunset. Fang tried to kill Sonic 8 times, he's functionally worse than Starline. But just because he's not in love with Eggman, he doesn't get any karma. Game characters have plot armor, but he should have had Knuckles imprison him again for relic theft and have the comic explain that he has robots that can automatically break him out after he's imprisoned long enough. And that could have happened the very next issue he wanted to use him. So he doesn't have to have him have a happy ending to use him again. Issue 69. While I like seeing Sonic Rider symmetry again, I'm still baffled that they refused to do an original story arc again. When I go to a new story for a new story. And this is by Evan Stanley, so I have to wonder if she was forced to do this. It immediately gets me less interested because I've already seen some of this, and I'm thinking of all the games to do a big reference to, why would it be this one? Flynn said the comic was for 8-year-olds. None of them would have been alive when Riders came out. They would only know about it by YouTubers who say it's a bad game. At least the Extreme Gear competition's a charity event. even if the writing didn't feel like telling us what exact help the charity was going to provide to make me care more. I have to imagine Knight is a really common, lazy name for owls. It must have been pretty forgettable because I forget it every time I'm told it. He arrogantly calls himself Sunset City's favorite DJ. And it turns out that Tails and other characters we know are already ready for the competition without an issue before this about them getting ready. So it's a bit confusing at first. But I'll gladly take fast pacing over the usual alternative. We're supposed to just assume he's right about his speculating on why each group is here instead of being told why. When normally we'd be shown why they joined an issue before they did. It'd be pretty likely that the parents of Surge and Kit would see them on TV here. But it'd make sense if they didn't go here because they could have not been watching. It could have had Omochild say 3, 2, 1 in the first panel we saw him in. But instead it feels like panels are wasted, as I'm wondering why on earth this was considered appealing to the fans. Sonic Riders was demonized because Sonic was on a hoverboard, and people who missed the appeal of Sonic thought trying to be cool was bad as a result. And because the games were too hard. Why did the writers think a Riders arc was a great idea? I assume the reputation of the Riders games has turned around just because there's been enough time for nostalgia to set in. But the same can be said about even worse games in the series. Riders is such a random choice when it hasn't been relevant in a decade. And is a spin-off. Surge looks horrible wearing those goggles. I guess Tango peer-pressured Whisper into this. I sure hope Sonic loses. Because him winning would be too predictable. I assume it's about the journey. So this better become interesting and exciting from a lot of things happening. And actually surprise me. Because so far there's two things I'm predicting. Either he wins, or the airboards get damaged. What's a clean race? You don't have to have dialogue all the time. I wish this was by the writer of that Metal Sonic story where he touches the metal virus, instead of characters talking just for the sake of it and boring me. Tails geeks out, showing off his character. The next page is a giant waste of time focusing on an OC of the writer. He already said who the event was made possible from, so why does he say it again? He says the charity is about raising money for the repair and recycling efforts of the restoration. I always assumed the restoration wasn't the only organization doing repairing, since it'd be impossible for a world this advanced to have it like that. But some people think otherwise, which goes to show you the shoddy world building, as we could have seen people fix the damage alongside them. For comedy's sake, there's a TV show displayed of a parody of Eggman who has a boring bragging speech and finally gets interrupted by crab meat pinching him. I know why he looks like this, but it would have been more satisfying if he looks like Eggman, and this didn't take so long to happen that I was too bored to appreciate anything. This story's got me desperate for it to end from the start from the lack of creativity and stakes. The only stakes are the worry that Surge is gonna sneak in bombs and throw them at Sonic. Why should I care about this stolen plot? I wanted to see Mimic get exposed for who he really is. Clean up your old toys before you play with your new ones. This is like when they had the Mecha Sally arc when already in the middle of the arc started by Jeffrey betraying Sonic. It's good that it builds character in Jewel by establishing that she hates overly sweet tasting things. It barely does anything and I'll probably forget it. Why is there a scene like this? Some people will get really bored at seeing a scene with no game characters and skip it. Jewel doesn't lampshade the name Chaos Cola and wishes she was at the tournament representing the restoration. And Clutch tries to convince her otherwise for a selfish reason. I guess he wants her here so she'll get killed. Otherwise, why would he even bother having her here? It's not like she'd be able to stop his plan if she was at the tournament. Because she doesn't have an airboard. He finally explains why she even partnered up with him. Because he promised to take the restoration global. And she was as stupidly naive as King Acorn for trusting an obviously evil character with black eyes. To be fair, the fact that nobody questions Mimic and Hem's eyes implies that there are entire races of people who look like this, and it'd be unrealistic for all of them to be evil, so she just didn't want to be bigoted. So if we're going with logic here, she doesn't fully trust him, but is acting like she does to feel good about herself. She says she has to go back to work, so the writer didn't forget who she is. I wish there was a narration from the Omochao announcer. It's just more boring dialogue to read to drag things out when nobody cares about what Omochao has to say. I have to wonder why Omochao got fired from his last position. How did Jet get ahead of Sonic? I had to take a few seconds to just assume Wade made his air board faster than the average board, because normally I'd assume that their boards would be the same speed. Normally I'd find Jet's way of talking annoying. But the way Sonic was in previous issues makes me appreciate it. He says they've been at work. Why does he expect them to care? That has nothing to do with Sonic, who never had a chance at stopping him from taking from Angel Island anyways, so it's not a blow to his ego. You've never faced a Babylon rogues like this. Okay, I have to assume Sega told the writers to have him say this to establish that Sonic Riders as a series is in fact in another universe. Which makes sense since Knuckles is a treasure hunter who floats and hangs out with Sonic all day, and Sonic and his friends were dressed differently even before they knew there was going to be an airboarding race to dress up for. I'm just so confused that they had him say this when the whole point of the arc is to pander to fans of Riders. Or if it's not, then it's even more baffling that the writer wrote this to have an excuse not to try to be creative if she knew no one asked for this. Now I want to see how Jet met him in this comic. That'd been a better story. This is nothing we haven't seen before from the first time they met. Wave accuses Jet of wasting his time, but he's not because he's still airboarding ahead. She sarcastically calls Tails' airboard creative for no logical reason, so I have to just assume she's lying to mess with him. But this time I get to see someone stand up to her for insulting Tails, which anybody would think to make as an improvement. One person standing up to her isn't enough though. And I have to wonder why Sonic doesn't do any. When you'd expect him to be the one saying this since he's supposed to be Tails' best friend. Not someone who doesn't care if he's being insulted. Or in this case, stops caring the second he stood up for it. He's smiling here. Storm is now so pathetic that he's afraid of Amy the second she looks at him. This would only make sense if he was continuing off Rider's Zero Gravity where she threw something metal at him, scaring him, but no. People could accuse this of favoritizing Amy, forgetting that the same writer had her run away scared from a badnik. She's made her tough since then though, but she shouldn't be trying this hard when Amy doesn't have her hammer or anything hard to throw at him. He has nothing to be scared of when he should assume he's stronger than her. Jen asks Sonic to say something and he doesn't. I like this. It's always good to see a character not talk more than they have to when 99% of the time, Sonic characters have nothing so interesting to converse about that it justifies talking more than necessary. Instead, Evan unintentionally gets right that Sonic is supposed to be a so-called man of few words. In the games, all they told Shadow to explain that he used Chaos Control with a fake emerald was say, "You actually saved me, you know." And the whole intended appeal is the comics based on the games. I have no idea how Sonic's doing whatever it is that's supposed to be shocking Jet. It makes no effort to explain anything to the people who never played Sonic Riders and haven't listened to a commentary of it in years, which is the vast majority of the Sonic fanbase. I know, because the highest sales the Riders series gets is only nearly 1.5 million, and the best-selling normal Sonic game by initial sales, Generations, sold 4.8 million. So there should have been a text box at the top of the panel explaining what the hell Sonic's doing. While normally I'd take niche references any day over the overdone alternative, like to a Game Gear game for example, basing an entire plot around a niche reference is misaimed to the point of being dumb when they only end up confusing the audience. How does Sonic making his board go right and back cause it to burst ahead of him? Why would he make it create fire behind it when that only means he'll have to not do it right behind a person to avoid igniting him? The fire should be more below the airboard than that, so there's no risk of anyone going into it. Sonic mocks Jet and that annoys him, which is satisfying. Game Sonic would have never done that. He never did that after going faster than Jet. If anything, just acted nice to him. This doesn't surprise me in the context of IDW, because IDW Sonic's more of an anti-hero, like was intended from the classic days. Sonic compliments Tails, so he thanks him, and it's sweet that Amy's smiling with her eyes closed as well as Tails. I don't know why Tails is laughing though. Sonic didn't tell a joke or say anything that could even be misinterpreted as funny. Even if he did, it'd be doing something even sitcoms know not to do because it's like laughing at your own joke. Cut engine? Since when was it cut? Why does Tails need to tell Sonic this? If this was Sonic's first ever time airboarding, he'd be doing worse than this and look serious. At least realistically. So he must have done practicing before this. So why wasn't he already told this? He did that thing that boosted him ahead casually like he's done it before. Wouldn't he have done it in front of Tails before? Jet makes Sonic wince when his airborne intentionally is bumped into his. There's pink gas from Lanolin's Wisbon and she whines to him, and I had to reread her text bubble in shock because it looked more like something Tails would say. She's being needlessly sophisticated and stuck up about phrasing it instead of talking like a normal person would. And I don't remember this being her character. Jet has to know she's not literally a cop and is just saying that to insult her. It's so ironic that Lanolin's being this killjoy referee while riding the most edgy looking black vehicle since Shadow's motorcycle. This would have made sense if she always dressed in black like Whisper, which she doesn't. So this would have only been a good fit for Whisper. But instead Whisper somehow is not dressed in black, despite liking the color enough to usually use it. So it's hard to believe she'd pick an outfit looking like this. I guess Tangle pressured her into it like everything else. She was cool when she was solo. She loses her solo anti-hero appeal as part of a team. Lanolin becomes pathetically ineffectual by saying, "If I see you doing that again," making me ask, why doesn't she punish him right away? She doesn't have any emotional attachment to him. I can't imagine it would be in the rules that if someone breaks the rules, he only gets punished for it after he does it again. I doubt that's ever the case in sports, and if it ever is, it's a sport doing it wrong. So it makes it lack self-awareness that she says she's here to uphold the rules. Even though this isn't her career. How did she get hired as a referee with no experience? Why did she say, "We're here to uphold them," when she's the only one of her team with a Wisbon that even could punish rule breakers? I would expect Surge to be the first one to break the rule, considering that her being here causes tension because she's never done this before and is one of the only ones here who wants to kill Sonic. And this is the first airboard race in the series where participants want to kill the heroes. And the first instance of cheating is so tame and uncreative. I hope we see more interesting, actually exciting forms of cheating. Because I've been bored silly seeing nothing but characters airboarding ahead with dialogue being the whole thing lengthening the comic. Meaning that nearly all I have to rant about is dialogue. At that point, you might as well be writing a picture book for all the things actually happening. Jet says he'll beat Sonic fair and square, and I'm immediately reminded that in Free Riders he got mad at Wade for sabotaging Tails' airboard because he wanted his team to beat Sonic fairly, or prove nothing about his team. So this is another way IDW Jet has done wrong. Jet wanting to win against Sonic fairly was interesting because he's evil, and it emphasizes that he wants to actually prove he's better than Sonic. Not just being motivated by trying to upset Sonic like most of Sonic's enemies would in a competition with him. Jet wanting to cheat is what a typical writer who's completely unfamiliar with Sonic would assume from him, based on only knowing his character at a superficial level, only being told one sentence about him. So it's how Pontac and Graf would write him. What was the point of a Sonic fan writing? I'm all for being more creative with the characters from the games, but if it's objectively a downgrade, that's unacceptable. It makes me wonder why Sega only cares enough to give the writers notes on the writing of Shadow. Amy's airboard malfunctions even though Tails is a genius, and this isn't Sonic's airboard. I assume it was sabotaged by Kitsunami. Sonic and Tails' airboard somehow messed up too, throwing them off them. And the next scene flashes back to yesterday evening, where Clutch somehow cares enough about Mimic to tell him to enjoy the sunset with him. At least it deepens his character a little that he can enjoy a sunset. Mimic shows him the group of participants he thinks he should be worried about. Why does he think he should be worried about the Babylon Rogues? How are they a threat to his plan when anyone could potentially do the same things with airboards as them, and airboards are all they're allowed to have in the tournament? Why does Clutch think they're morons? He doesn't know them personally. Jet's a moron in this iteration, but he doesn't have a way of knowing that. There's no reason they'd have gotten themselves famous for being morons as a whole, when all they do is effortlessly get away with stealing treasure. The story starts wasting my time after that. Clutch reveals that he told Mimic to tell the people in the inspection room with the airboards waiting in them to sabotage the airboards. So that makes sense. Sure would be confusing if this was contradicted. Clutch says it's best to be thorough as an excuse for saying make sure they hit all 3 of them. Then for no reason, the story is a flashback to when Mimic first told Surge to use something to sabotage Sonic's airboard. How's she supposed to do that without being caught? I hate how her hair looks here. By waiting until now to have flashbacks, the story is implying that it has no faith in the audience to stay interested in the issue if it told the story in chronological order like it's supposed to. To actually get you invested in the tournament instead of never caring because it happens out of nowhere like whatever, and rushes to establish excuses for every group's motivation. I like that Kid tends to sleep with a bunch of unnecessary pillows around him because it adds to his character from what it implies about him. That he needs those extra pillows for comfort. But the only reason Surge would wake up with her blanket barely on is if it was a hot night. So that means it makes no sense that he put up with all those pillows overheating him. The blanket wouldn't just fall off her for no reason. And Surge is paranoid of Mimic, which is more realistic than her actually trusting him completely. And it's what I expected. Though I didn't expect her to be the type to jump to the conclusion that any random guy could be a creep when she's clearly ugly, so she wouldn't have experience with guys being creeps to her like that. She also lampshades that sneaking around isn't her style, making me again assume that she's only going along with it because her failure to beat Sonic her way ruined her confidence in her way. Why does Clutch think she and Kit were left nearly dead before he found them? They clearly weren't. They can heal really fast and show no sign of starvation, which would be impossible anyways if they can heal really fast because it worked by making themselves regenerate instantly. I guess the appeal of Clutch is supposed to be that it's a mystery why he's even doing this plan. It actually makes sense if his plan was to simply have Surge put a bomb on the board that's more effective so it actually hurts him, but that would be guaranteed to kill him, so he can't be ridden with any brain cells at all. Then the writers wrote themselves into a corner where they have to make a character act in an unbelievable way for the plot. That's lame. A good writer writes like he's going through a maze the proper way. There's no point in her not being with Starline when she's with a character who's being a substitute Starline to her anyways without the hypnosis. For once Amy acts like the fangirl she's meant to be, and I can't get enough of that. Sonic grabs her shoe and somehow says she's off the board when technically she's still holding it. What does Sonic expect to do about the haywire thing? He's not good with technology. A blast of wisp energy, I assume, hits the board but somehow isn't shown impacting it. So I just have to assume it did to get Team Sonic standing still. Tangle's the only one in the referee team caring enough about them to show compassion. Lanolin naturally points out that they should get off the track because they were risking a pileup. Tangle somehow doesn't know she's right, but at least I get to see someone point out that we're supposed to see her as harsh. So she's filling the role that Shadow's supposed to fill, being the anti-hero who does things in his own pragmatic way. She's just as rude to Sonic as Shadow is anyways, but more subtle and formal about how she talks. If this is her intended character now, she's redundant and an insult to Shadow by being in his place. Even though I do root for her right here. You'd think the person Tangle would be more interested in calling out would be the one who risks shooting Amy herself, or even Sonic and Tails, which could have happened if she didn't aim far enough ahead to properly account for the speed they were going ahead. Whisper nearly killed or injured them. And I know that's how it is because why would Whisper have ever tried shooting Mimic at all if shooting people with it only gave them a power-up to use? Kit calling Surge Big Sis instead would have been good, showing that they really did become close, but alas. Instead he might as well be a mindless robot like Metal Sonic all over again. How pointless. Barely even any lines, which is only good in that she ruins the appeal of his character when she does give him a lot of lines. He's only here because he has to be. Other than padding, what is the point of a scene where Mimic's telling Jewel what happened? The only reason I care about Jewel is because she's a good person and has angst. and the former would be assumed about any background character. The only great thing about Jewel is that she's the only IDW character that's original. I like that to explain that Central City is where the heroes are. I don't get to see the Sonic characters sit in a restaurant nearly often enough, so seeing them do normal people things humanizes them. It should happen a lot more often so I feel like they're relatable people, and not just characters that exist to deal with the bad guys. Which barely happens anymore because the Diamond Cutters have all the focus, and even they never do any missions against Eggman lately. Amy and Sonic have the common sense to get suspicious from the malfunctions since Amy's board isn't made by Tails. Somehow she preferred to buy one for no reason. I could have assumed they'd get suspicious. Tails is supposed to be the smart one. He should have figured out what she did. Amy wants to investigate, and somehow Tails says the restoration shuttle leaves tomorrow as an excuse for not examining the shuttle, even though that'll be several hours from now. Why is Tails the stupid one here? It's like an STC. You could have another person be the one doing all of the inventing, and the plans of IDW would be the same. Tails has to tell Sonic that trashing the shuttle ruining the sweepstakes would defeat the purpose of investigating. He never said he trashed the shuttle entirely. This dialogue could only be less natural if they were stilted. So the characters are only made to be stupid to make Eggman look necessary for them to team up with. It's instantly obvious from the fact that Eggman came here without his robots that he's here to offer a truce, not fight them. Though they could be assuming he has a dangerous machine in his bank. All of Team Sonic take Eggman very seriously in this situation, which is how it's supposed to be. But it's only this way because he doesn't do this all the time. While in Sonic Boom they wouldn't react. And even in Sonic Boom, he was used to tracking Sonic down. What do you mean you're not used to it? The only way you could track them down would be to send flying cameras or robots with camera footage he can see to scour the area. And that's not hard work. Why would a guy who relies on machines track him down purely by walking everywhere until he finds them? Eggman isn't the type to stop being used to tracking down the guy he fights with regularly just because he took a break to get new ideas. Eggman's never looked so incompetent. There should always be some comedy with Eggman, but I'd rather have different comedy. This is even more insulting to his character than Pontiac and Grappler to him. At least he has a new outfit. What mandate? Eggman says he conveniently saw a Warbot watching the airing of the Riders tournament. I saw it coming a mile away that Eggman would see the thing making fun of him. This kind of thing was already done in AOSCH where it took more effort from the writer because Eggman looked like himself, but it still made an egg pun and referenced a famous commercial. Eggman got brought his food off screen, which shows what kind of food he likes to eat beyond what he eats in the games already. It's good that he has a villain moment by sitting on Tails. And Tails is amazed by seeing that Eggman made his own version of extreme gear that has solid hologram camouflage. But he's amazed before getting told that. The thing actually impressive about this. Would he say whoa at a new game console too? It looks like he's impressed by literally all new technology when it shouldn't be surprising that Eggman would do this. Eggman must just be saying he'll return the favor to Sonic to make himself look good to him to manipulate him. Because it's out of character otherwise. His motive for giving them a way to sneak onto the shuttle is that he wants to find out who caused their boards to sabotage. Curiosity is a believable motive. But why couldn't they just send robots to do this for him? Like Metal Sonic? He already teams up with Sonic too much. Oh no, there's a pebble in my shoe. Guess we'll have to team up with Sonic to get it out. We're almost at that level if you think about it. Which would be as easy as remembering that he said he wouldn't hire the Babylon Rogues because he could just send his robots to do what they do. This is why Sonic comics and cartoons shouldn't be going off the games because it's already hard enough for them to keep track of their own continuity. Instead, end up with a lot more continuity errors. Logically, he'd only have them use this thing because it'd have a bomb in it that would blow them up. Sure, he said blowing them up with a bomb would be too easy, but he only said that to Starline. And he was perfectly fine with planning on carpet bombing Sonic and bad guys, so obviously that rule only applies to him. He's just a complete hypocrite. The story ends with Sonic somehow smiling while saying he's going to agree to the deal even though he was believably suspicious and reluctant before. Shouldn't Eggman be offering this deal to the Babylon Rogues instead of humbling himself working for Sonic again? In Frontiers, he was so embarrassed he had to work with Sonic so much that he refused to. The heroes would be just as likely to go home with the technology as the Rogues would, so they're just as trustworthy. He should explain that he thinks Jet would demand a cash reward, or he did when he approached him. The story ends with words that seem to be a reference to Ghost Rider for no apparent reason. I can't imagine they'd be able to find out anything from investigating an empty room that only used to have airboards. Why would there be any hint of what happened there? There could conveniently be a camera in that room, which would be common sense to catch anyone wanting to steal the airboards. So I say conveniently because apparently there aren't cameras in the restoration that catch Mimic, as if no place has cameras. But Clutch is the one in charge of the tournament, so he'd be able to insist on there not being a camera there. The lack of a camera would be a dead giveaway that the one in charge wanted the boards to be sabotaged, so it would be pointless to not have a camera that would record the sabotage. And either way, he had no way of knowing the heroes would get to that room, so of course he wouldn't know to delete the camera footage that obviously the security guy would have seen, so he'd have to have been told by Clutch to look the other way on that. Some people would still warn people anyways because they could get another job and they have actual morality. So it would be more believable if the security guy was prevented from watching the footage by a shape-shifted Mimic. I wonder if the next issue will fail to explain this because the comic's so sloppily written that it forgot the security cameras are omnipresent. So instead, either the investigating will be a waste of time, or Deus Ex Machina will help the heroes. If Tails was as competent as he should be, he would have already had a camouflager for his biplane. And all he'd have to do is tell Sonic to run to it holding him to get to it in seconds, and then the plane would get to the shuttle. The same plane that went to other continents and Unleashed without it going from day to night. We've already sabotaged Tails' board in the same way that the boards were sabotaged. She did that in Sonic Free Riders. Something I should have mentioned last issue as soon as Surge and Blaze were in the same room but didn't think about it because I was distracted by all the other problems with the story, is how unbelievable is the idea that Sonic didn't think to get Blaze to cure Surge and Kit's amnesia too. Because he'd see people with amnesia near the person who cured his amnesia and connect the dots. I can make sense of this in a minute, but it's so dumb because even a random person on Tumblr wondered if Blaze would do this for them. Even if Sonic's just that slow that it took a while to remember she could because the Soul Emerald's curing amnesia is unintuitive, it makes as much sense as the Chaos Emeralds being able to control time. When before, all someone could do with them was go super, but he didn't forget about Chaos Control. And it's not just Sonic who's stupid. It's also every friend around him because all of them are people he could have told about Blaze's amnesia curing to be polite because any normal friend would ask what his experience away from them was like. So no one ever thinking to cure them gets less likely the more people are involved. The good faith answer I'm going with is that uncharacteristically well thought out of Sonic, he did realize he could get Blaze to cure their amnesia, ideally before she met Surge. But realized that curing the amnesia would mostly lead to more suffering for Surge and Kit and their families when they return to them, because the brainwashing would make them not how they want them to be at all, leading to their families arguing with them and getting argued with on a daily basis at worst. Why put them through all that? Surge and Kit would be relieved to go back to their families at first, and their families would be happy to be with him again at first, but it quickly devolved into them mostly being mad at each other for Surge and Kit refusing to go to school and planning against Sonic. It only worked out well if getting over amnesia made Surge go back to caring about her parents and how they think of her, to the point where she'd go back to school and tell Kit to do the same. Or go back to doing her studies at home if we pretend that everyone's homeschooled in the Sonic universe, just because we didn't see schools in the games yet. By that logic, cabbage doesn't exist in Sonic. Surge and Kit would find schoolwork too boring when they're brainwashed to want something else. And why would they do that when they could spend all day in the restoration watching TV? They might end up going back to living with Clutch. The bad faith answer to this is that Sonic's so self-absorbed, he doesn't care that they have amnesia because Surge wants to kill him, which is the same reason he didn't care about her tragic origin being his fault. He's focused on his own problems, and curing their amnesia wouldn't benefit him when they'd still be brainwashed. Unless their brainwashing is worn off. In which case, their not knowing about their true identities is the only reason they're still going with what was intended for them. But Sonic's supposed to be a good person. He's trying to present himself as one anyways. So curing their amnesia would be a way to virtue signal and get their trust. This issue by Ian Flynn was about Fang eventually escaping the warship with a vehicle because apparently it can hear his whistle from really far away. As if there's no end to the amount of new powers as the plot demands it has. But I can believe that with technology. It's a vehicle, so there's plenty of room for all sorts of technology we've never seen before in it. Sonic himself was pointless to the plot. At least he used an ice sword and got the warp topaz, which he was smart enough to keep. Does he still have the sword, or was he impossibly dumb enough to ditch it? Because it was never explained why he ditched it. So there were a few cool moments. But that doesn't make a constantly padded out, boring story good. By that logic, pre-boot Flynn Archie would be good because cool stuff is all it has to offer normally, since Julie Sue's barely used in it. But it's not above criticism, and neither is this. Sonic is already supposed to be cool, and it usually is, so it doesn't become great just by being standard, doing the bare minimum to be good. Not when it has an overabundance of major problems. I didn't hate the Fang miniseries. I just feel nothing because of it. When something's only good because it's not bad, then ouch. The people complaining about Sonic Mania being mostly old levels, myself included, have every reason to be mad at this for having the only new setting be a warship, which doesn't feel remotely unique anyways. If this was at least mostly new settings, I would have been more impressed by it. You know, I would have been 10 times as impressed by the traps that Knuckles used if they were traps I'd never seen before, because then the writer would have come up with them himself, and Knuckles would have come up with them. This boring issue was by Evan Stanley, and all it was about was Sonic characters airboarding ahead in yet another racing tournament with dialogue being all that pads out the read time until their boards malfunction. And they have to accept Eggman's technology to be able to investigate the room where the airboards were. It's baffling that the creative major writer chose to be uncreative in how she wrote the story by basing the next little arc on a game that a fourth of the fan base played. It also feels low stakes the whole time, so I really have no reason to care about most of it when almost nothing happens. It's better to do a reference to something niche, and I like the writer's imagery, but I'd much rather see Mimic get exposed. But at least the arc isn't a waste of time, because it is getting the comic closer to having the heroes discover Clutch's evil plan, so that he won't be partnered with Jewel anymore. But this arc didn't need to exist, because it could have easily not been written to have partnered up with her successfully, because it was common sense that she had been warned about one of the heroes' enemies to prevent this kind of thing. So it's still a filler arc that'll only not be if it leads to Mimic getting exposed. But Mimic could have been exposed from some other plot in one issue, instead of taking forever to resolve a plot point I wanted resolved immediately.